Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I would like to thank you for joining today's ADHD Experts presentation in honor of Father's Day. It's titled For Dads with and Without ADHD, How to Understand and Support Your Kids. ADHD can complicate the parent-child relationship. For dads with ADHD, a child's ADHD-related challenges may remind them of their own difficulties growing up with the condition at a time when it was largely not well understood. The double dose of ADHD in the household, and perhaps even more than a double dose, can also complicate family dynamics. For fathers without ADHD, these ADHD-related behaviors may be particularly difficult to understand. So today in this webinar, fathers and all parents will learn how to best support their children and address challenges related to ADHD in their children and in themselves. We will also discuss how parents can manage their stress to set a calmer tone at home, and how fathers in particular can ultimately improve their relationships with their children. Leading today's presentation is Brendan Mahan. Brendan is an internationally recognized ADHD and executive function coach, a highly engaging, sought-after speaker, and the host of the ADHD Essentials podcast. A former teacher, mental health counselor, and principal, Brendan helps individuals, families, schools, and businesses manage the challenges of ADHD and neurodiversity through an approach that blends education, collaborative problem solving, and accountability with compassion, humor, and a focus on strengths and growth. His trademark wall of awful model is something you should all check out. You can contact him at brendan@adhdessentials.com. Before I hand over the microphone to Brendan, I have just a few housekeeping items. Those of you tuned into the live webinar may submit questions to the expert at any time by navigating to the text box under the video player. You may need to scroll. To download the slides, just click on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. And if you are interested in the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in the email you will receive around an hour after the live broadcast. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search for podcast 405 to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the Certificate of Attendance option. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine. If you sign up now, you will receive our fall issue, which includes our annual Success at School section, plus features on school accommodations, telehealth services, emotional dysregulation in teens, and many other topics relevant to our listeners today. Finally, the sponsor of this webinar is Brain Balance. Brain Balance is a holistic cognitive development program designed to help kids, teens, and adults with ADHD, learning differences, anxiety, and beyond improve focus, attention, and behavior. Brain Balance creates a customized plan based on your child's needs to support their social, emotional, and academic growth. An exploratory study with Harvard's McLean Hospital found the Brain Balance program to be as effective as low-dose stimulant medication in alleviating ADHD symptoms in children. Visit brainbalance.com to learn more about Brain Balance today. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without any further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Brendan Mahan. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this discussion.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a genuine honor to be doing a workshop on Father's Day or around Father's Day, with that sort of being the vibe. Father's Day is like the start of next week. And because I'm a dad, right? Like, I'm a father of identical twin sons who are 13 years old. Absolutely, ADHD is there as well as some other neurodiversity stuff. And of course, like so many kids right now, my kids are getting hit by the anxiety that has come with COVID, like the long tail of COVID. My guys are getting hit by that too. So I understand the challenges that so many of the parents at home are facing with their kids, and how do I navigate this and what do I do with this? As has already been said, I'm the host of the ADHD Essentials podcast. I understand ADHD. So professionally, right, I sit on the board for the organizing committee for the conference, for the ADHD International Conference. I do the podcast. I work one-on-one with clients, and I run online parent coaching groups, and I do professional developments. But most importantly, I understand ADHD because I have it. So I look out of ADHD eyes each and every day, and I get it viscerally. I know the roller coaster that is this disorder. Today, we're going to be talking about dads. So I see that there's, at the moment, 887 people kind of hanging around. I imagine you're not all dads. I imagine that some of you are moms. And moms, this is going to be a little bit of like a fly on the wall moment for you to see kind of how dads experience life a little bit, because I'm going to be saying stuff out loud that doesn't get said out loud enough about dads and men and kind of how life works for us, which is important. That said, I'm not coming from like a misogynistic jerky view. I'm just coming from like this is how culturally men are expected to behave and fathers are expected to behave, and how those expectations are changing is some of what we're going to talk about. And of course, how ADHD plays a role in those expectations. First off, I want to honor the fact that we have two different kinds of dads potentially in this workshop, in addition to all the moms, two different kinds of moms too. But again, this is a dad workshop. We're going to have dads who have ADHD, and we're going to have dads who don't have ADHD. Pretty straightforward. But kind of a significant change, right? Because the dads who have ADHD, they're going to understand the ADHD, at least to some degree, depending on their level of expertise and understanding around the disorder. But they'll certainly get it viscerally. They'll certainly get it experientially. They'll be like, I know what this is because I've had that happen. I've been there and felt like I wasn't good enough and didn't know why, and watched other people do things more effectively than I could and been uncertain as to why that is. And then suddenly I found something that I was amazing at and couldn't understand why other people didn't understand it the way I did, right? So that's common as an ADHD experience. Is the basic stuff like pay your bills and do the dishes is incredibly hard. But then you give us some incredibly complicated problem that's vaguely in our area of knowledge, and we become like the greatest person walking the face of the planet. And we can solve these problems and address these challenges with immense skill that you wouldn't think we had, because our car is a mess, right? And dads who don't have ADHD but have kids with ADHD might be looking at their kids and go, like, why can't you do this thing? All I want you to do is mow the lawn. Why is that so hard? Or rake leaves or do your homework. And it can be difficult to connect with those kids because it's hard to understand why they're struggling in the ways that they're struggling. Now, I'm not going to go super deep on the reasons, because Attitude Magazine does a phenomenal job, and I don't want to recreate stuff that they've already done. So I'm not doing a deep dive on executive function, for example. But those resources are here, literally, in Attitude. So check those out if you need to. As we go into this, I want to start by talking about traditional expectations of masculinity, and I want to put it in an ADHD frame. So I basically just went looking for traditional expectations of masculinity. I literally Googled it and then kind of brought things together and distilled some stuff. first off, there's this idea of like, well, a real man is independent and self-sufficient and blah, 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 right? He can go be in the woods by himself for 30 years and survive and kill grizzly bears and stuff. Sort of, right? That's difficult for a lot of reasons. One, our world is not as independent as it used to be. It's much more connected and interdependent. So that plays a role in making some of that independent stuff challenging. But if you're an ADHD person, that level of independence can be difficult, and it can especially be difficult if you're a kid with ADHD. So if we're putting that expectation on our children, whether it's a son or a daughter, doesn't matter, that they're just going to be independent and like we're placing this value really high, we're going to find it's challenging for a kid with ADHD. And for a dad with ADHD, speaking as one, that idea of independence and self-sufficiency, like that's hard. I need to be on a team for me to really shine, including in my marriage, right? Like if I was responsible for the executive functioning stuff of my household, we would be homeless like in a week, right? Because I'm just not good at paying bills. That's not my skill set. But I'm really good at navigating the challenges that my kids face. When they're upset, when they're struggling, that's my skill set. So my household is a little bit gender flipped, where my wife tends to be more of the money person and I tend to be more of the social, emotional person. And that's okay, right? That's not uncommon for an ADHD family where dad has ADHD. It's not uncommon for dad to have some social, emotional skills that not all dads have, because not all dads have to have them. But we ADHD people, we kind of need those social, emotional skills because we have to be able to talk to other people to get the things that we need, especially when we trip and fall. We often start to learn them in school when we're trying to talk our way out of a book report that we didn't write and trying to get an extra day or something. Another element of fatherhood, of masculinity that is valued is physical prowess, right? Strength, coordination, that kind of stuff. ADHD brings with it some comorbidities that literally affect our coordination and our ability to execute in terms of physical prowess. So again, another expectation of masculinity that's kind of undermined by this disorder. The third one is that, well, men are tough and resilient, right? Dads should be tough and resilient. I'm going to tell you, man, people with ADHD, neurodivergent folks in general, so ADHD, OCD, autism, anxiety, whatever, they're pretty tough and they're pretty resilient. The tricky part is that a lot of that resilience is pointed towards their own brains, right? Like my brain does not fit in this world. I'm very much a square peg in a round hole. And so it's rough sometimes for me to be doing the things that I need to do, for me to get the things done that I need to get done. There's days when my wife jokes about how I'm kind of a space cadet and it's cool and it doesn't bother me. And there's days when my wife makes that same joke and it bristles at me, right? Because I'm like, I'm just not in a space where that feels okay right now. So our neurodivergence means that we're being tough and resilient all day, every day. It's often called masking, where we're trying to behave as though we're neurotypical, even though we're not. And that means we're using this resiliency on a regular basis. And no one even knows. So when it comes time to actually be tough and resilient, sometimes we're amazing at it. Sometimes we struggle at it. It depends on where we are in terms of how much effort we've had to put into being tough and resilient in our day-to-day lives. Men are expected to be intellectual, logical, emotionally restricted. There's some challenges there too, right? Like often ADHD and giftedness go hand in hand, not all the time, but that's another comorbidity. So that part's good, I guess, because that's getting the intellectual part. That's getting the knowledge piece. But folks with ADHD can struggle with emotional regulation. That's one of the executive functions that gets hit the hardest for us. So we're not going to be emotionally restricted unless it's coming from a place of, I have to be emotionally restricted or else I'm going to blow up or else I'm going to get in trouble. And that's really a trauma response more than anything else, right? So when it comes to our kids, we want to let them have emotions. We want to learn how to navigate those emotions, how to validate them, how to hear them, how to understand them, right? When someone is communicating from an emotional place, it doesn't want you to solve the problem. That person, those emotional communications want to be validated. They want to be honored. And once they're validated, then we can shift out of that emotional communication world and into more of a problem-solving, logical communication world. It's important to know that men tend to come from a logical place. We tend to come from a problem-solving approach. That's how a lot of men approach the world. And that's not always what's needed. Often what is needed is validation. So you're allowed to ask your spouse, ask your kid, do you want me to help you solve this problem right now, or do you just need to be heard? And if they're like, I just need to be heard, cool. And with your kid, they might not be able to answer that question depending on how old they are. Assume they want to be heard and then pivot later and say, do you want me to help you solve this, or do you just need to talk about it? Cool. Okay, we'll talk about it then. And then, 15 minutes later, maybe you check in again if they wanted to help solve it. But mostly listen and validate. That sounds really hard. That sounds really frustrating. I'm sorry that this is happening to you. That's really scary. Whatever makes sense. Also, men are expected to be financially successful. ADHD can limit a person's ability to achieve in their professional and financial growth and success. It just does. It's a learning disorder. It's a disability. It makes it harder to make money. Speaking from personal experience, my wife makes more money than I do. I'm like a cool ADHD guy, but my wife makes more money than I do. And some of that is because I have the job that can flex when other things need to happen, like we're remodeling our kitchen. I'm the one working from home. So my job is the one getting disrupted by workmen in the house, and we need to pay this thing, go to the bank and get money and all that kind of stuff. My wife is not being disrupted as much. And because I'm home anyway, I'm the one navigating the kids when they get home, right? My wife and I had a conversation the other day about how many interruptions I have during the day, and she was kind of stunned by how many there have been, at least since the kitchen remodel has been going on. And as an ADHD person, when I get interrupted, it's that much harder for me to get back into what I'm trying to do. And that leads to challenges around doing the thing. While I'm talking about stresses, that's a thing we need to know, right? The expectations and stresses on dads. More is being asked of fathers than was asked in previous generations. Also, more is being asked of moms than in previous generations. And a lot of that boils down to the reduction in specialization, right? It used to be moms specialized in home stuff and dads specialized in job stuff. Like dad brings home the bacon, mom fries it up in the pan kind of a thing. That's not the case anymore. Now moms are expected to work and raise the kids, and dads are expected to work and raise the kids. And we're both being challenged in that way. Dads are being asked to provide financially like they always have been, but there's much more expectation around being engaged with your kids, helping them with any mental health challenges they might be having going on, helping them with their schoolwork, helping them with social development and making friends and all that stuff, and then helping them get engaged with activities. And oftentimes, dad's the one to do the activities, right? It used to be kind of provide for the family and also bring the kids to play baseball or whatever. Sometimes it was gender specific. If it was a girl, mom did it. If it was a boy, dad did it. But now we're also looking at like just spending more time with your kids. Dads spend more time with their kids than they used to. And that is just an added stressor. Dads are also expected to help around the house a lot more than in previous generations. My dad didn't do anything. He didn't know how to cook. He didn't clean the house. Like that was all stuff my mom did. And my mom was also a nurse. So like she was doing a lot. Dads are expected to communicate more effectively now, and they're expected to apply their emotional intelligence more effectively than in previous generations. It is no longer okay to just lose your temper and start yelling. That's not a thing anymore. And I'm not complaining about that. I think that's good. I think that's important. My parent groups a lot of it is about not losing your temper and working to minimize the stress and anxiety at home so that we can communicate more effectively and be more patient. This is how I want you to look at anxiety, because I think it's going to help. Stress, anxiety, whichever word you like better. This is a spectrum, right? So up here is where we're in fight, flight, and freeze. Over here in the 8, 9, 10, where it says on extreme and unbearable anxiety, I'm just in full amygdala, right? I'm fully trying to keep myself safe. I'm yelling, I'm screaming, I'm arguing, I'm running away, I'm shutting down. Down in the green is where I'm making careful, logical decisions, right? I'm thinking things out. I'm problem solving effectively. In the middle, it's kind of both, right? Like, so you're able to make some good decisions, and sometimes the emotions win out depending on how far up the spectrum we are. What I want to point out is that no one is starting at zero. There's like one guy in Tibet, some Buddhist monk, that's at a 0 for anxiety and stress. The rest of us, we're somewhere in the middle, because if you have a job, you probably have at least one, you're probably at least one tier up, right? So we'll bring you up to the 1. If you can't afford to lose that job, that's more stressful. So let's bring it to a 2. And then if ADHD is in your house, you're going up to at least a 3. And I don't know, maybe you're living through a worldwide trauma event in the form of a global pandemic. Let's bring you up to a 4, right? So we're already in this moderate level of anxiety without anything else that might be added on to that. If you have a parent, if you're part of the sandwich generation, like I am, my dad's got cancer. Not only is that stressful because dad's got cancer, but for a long time, I was taking dad to his cancer appointments on a weekly basis, every Friday. So all of a sudden, my ability to do my job was cut down by a full day because it took a full day to make that happen. That increases that anxiety even more. If you have ADHD and your kid has ADHD, we're upping the anxiety level. If there's conflict between the spouses, or you're divorced or headed in that direction, we're going to be increasing the baseline anxiety. It's important to recognize that we live with a certain baseline level of anxiety that we start to think is a 0, but it's not a 0. It's just our baseline. And the higher our baseline is, the more likely we are to hit fight, flight, and freeze. The more likely we are to yell, the more likely we are to disengage, the more likely we are to shut down. I just want to point that out because we want to take whatever steps we can to reduce that anxiety. And here's some stuff we can do. I have a model that I call SHRED, which stands for sleep, habits, relationships, exercise, and diet. Dads, we got to do that. We got to get enough sleep, 8 hours. I know some of you are like, I can be fine on 5 hours. No, you can't. You just are used to 5 hours. Get 8 hours of sleep and see what happens. I know that happened to my sensei, who used to get 6 hours, and then his job changed, and suddenly he could get 8 hours of sleep, and he was like, I'm so much more clear-headed. This is amazing. Yeah, because she needed those extra 2 hours. Habits, we want them to be ADHD friendly if we have ADHD. And even if we don't, ADHD friendly strategies and habits are really good for people who don't have ADHD too. They work for everybody. So that's things like effectively using your calendar, planning your week, planning your day, right? Practicing mindfulness, these kinds of things. We want to find those really good ADHD strategies and habits. And you're going to find those in Attitude Magazine. So check that out. Relationships are also critical. We want to have good relationships with our kids. We want to make sure we have some friends outside of the family that we hang out with. We want to make sure that we have a good relationship with our spouse if we have one. So pay attention to that stuff too. Exercise, 20 minutes of cardio a day, at least, if you can. I know not everybody can. There's times when I have trouble with that. But getting cardio in is critical, especially for the ADHD brain, but everyone's brain, because it oxygenates the brain, and it just helps us think more clearly. We become less fog-brained. And then our diet, right? Shop the supermarket perimeter. Mostly skip the stuff in the middle because it's full of simple carbohydrates. So primarily fruits and vegetables, meat and dairy, eggs, that kind of stuff. Also, when you have a minute, because I know you're not too busy, you probably are, let's be honest, but try to consider some domains of self-care that you could try to practice. Try to fit in at least 3 of these a day. And those domains are practical self-care. That's things like chores and running errands, doing the laundry, that kind of stuff. Emotional self-care, so mindfulness meditation, counseling, journaling, that kind of stuff. Physical self-care, exercise, eating well, pretty straightforward. We already talked about some of that. Mental self-care, reading, just spending time learning. Pick something new, right? A new hobby, a new subject, whatever that may be. Social self-care, so seeing friends, spending time with your family. And then spiritual self-care, which doesn't mean you have to be a part of a religion. You can be an atheist, you can be agnostic, but you can visit nature. You can also have a faith practice. That's also valid. So go to temple, go to the mosque, go to church, practice your faith in whatever form that is. Those kinds of self-care are important. And breaking it up into those different domains helps us see the way that we, one, can practice self-care, and two, whether or not we're doing it. And are we leaning in too much into one area? And if that one area is doing it for us, fantastic. But is that focus in one area undermining something else, right? Am I spending so much time at the gym that I'm not connecting with my family? If I am, that matters. I need to figure out how to balance that out. Maybe it means I bring the family to the gym or the gym to my family. I don't know. But play with that. So this is that full spectrum of anxiety, because when we go up, we have to come back down, right? So we might only go up to a 4 and then jump over to the 4 and then come back down to a 2 or something. But we have to go up and then come back down. As we go up, first, everything is fine. Then for kids, like, this is where the fibbing starts to happen. It's when they're lying about stuff a little bit. Do you have homework? No. Did you do the dishes? I was just about to do the dishes. I know I've told that like a dozen times in the last week, not in my life. That's the thing, right? Sometimes you tell a little fib to kind of protect your own ego, protect the other person's perspective of you because you want them to think well of you, that kind of stuff. Sometimes folks with ADHD tell a lie or fib because they have bad memory and they think they did their homework, but it turns out they didn't. Or they don't think they have homework, but it turns out they do. That stuff happens as well. In here is fight, flight, and freeze in that middle section, right? Extreme, unbearable anxiety. Then as we come down, there's 2 more Fs, forgive and fix. What's going on is the green is like logical decision-making. The red is emotional decision-making. The orange is a little bit of both. So we want to use logical strategies and emotional strategies where they fit best. As we come down out of an anxiety spike, we want to use emotional strategies. I talked about this already. That means we want to validate those emotions. We want to talk to our kid or our spouse or ourselves or our friend or our coworker in a way that validates how they're feeling. Yeah, no, that's really hard. That's probably pretty frustrating. I can see why that would be scary. It must be incredibly disappointing to find out that he did that. And then as we start to come out of this emotional state, or they start to come out of this emotional state, then we move to fix. But that forgiveness part is important. Not only do we want to validate the emotions, but with our kids, we want to make it clear to them that we've forgiven them for this emotional spike. We've forgiven them for the problem. They are still our kid. We still respect and value that relationship. And this is also important for friends and family and spouses and all that stuff too, coworkers. Because if we just jump to fix, which is what especially dads tend to want to do, and we haven't repaired the relationship, the kid knows it. And what happens is it feels like in order for them to get forgiven, they have to fix the problem. So they feel like the relationship is going to stay damaged. Dad is going to stay disappointed in them until they fix whatever the problem was. And that doesn't make sense, right? Because they're going to need help to solve this problem. Because if they had the skills to fix the problem, they probably would have avoided it in the first place. So they're going to need help. But if they don't feel like we've forgiven them, they're probably not going to look to us for help because they're going to feel like the only way I can reconnect with dad and feel worthy of his help again is by fixing this problem, but I don't know how to fix this problem. And now I'm stuck. On the other hand, if we make that forgiveness clear, then they feel forgiven. They feel like things are okay, and they're able to address the problem with our help if necessary. So focus on that forgiveness. A quick little interlude. This is the thing I see happen with dads all the time. Sometimes we don't communicate our own escalation up that anxiety scale effectively enough, and that matters. So let's pretend that your kid has left their dishes in the living room and you walk over to them and you're like, hey, can you put your dishes in the sink? And they don't. and you get a little more aggravated, right? You're already annoyed that it's there, but like a good dad, you're trying to hide that aggravation, right? Because you don't want to be scary, dad. So for a second time, you say, hey, can you put your dishes in the sink? And you come back a little while later and they haven't done it. And you're like, "Rah!" But you squash that. You're like, hey, can you put your dishes in the sink? You never once made it clear to them that you were escalating. So on the fourth time, when you see these dishes still out, you explode. Put your dishes in the sink. What's going on? How many times do I have to ask you? Rah! Right? And all of a sudden they're panicked and they start walking on eggshells because dad's a crazy person. Dad goes from 0 to 10 in no time flat. But what's really happening is we're hiding that escalation. Instead, I want you to communicate more clearly with your kids about your own escalation. It's okay that you're escalating. Don't be a jerk about it, though. This is an example of how I would do it. Hey, can you put your dishes in the sink? And then they don't. Second time through. I'm pretty sure I already asked you to put your dishes in the sink. Can you do that? Let's say they don't do it again. Third time now, my third ask, right? Now I go up to them and I go, this is the third time I'm asking you to put your dishes in the sink. Here's the deal. If I come in here again and see those dishes, I'm going to lose my whole entire mind. Like, I'm going to lose it. So your call. I've communicated my escalation. I'm not being threatening, right? I'm not telling them I'm going to throw them out the window or something. I'm just like, I'm going to get really mad if you don't put your dishes in the sink. But I'm not saying that in a way that communicates that emotionally. I'm not yelling. I'm not growling. I'm not being super stern and mean. I'm just like, hey, this is starting to get to me. I'm intentionally squishing how frustrated I am by this. I hope you can tell. Put your dishes in the sink so I don't have to take the blinders off, right? So communicate your escalation. Let your kid know when they're starting to drive you bananas. And also use words like that, right? Like I use phrases like, oh my God, you're bugging me. Hey, you're driving me bananas. And I use those kinds of phrases because they're a little bit silly. And that helps de-escalate my level of frustration and my emotional response. So again, as we escalate up this escalation of anxiety, we want to make sure that we're communicating that escalation to the people in our lives so that they know, because that's emotional intelligence. Hiding our emotions is not emotional intelligence. It's just hiding our emotions. Being able to keep the emotions in check while still communicating that they're happening, that's a higher emotional quotient. Pivoting to connecting with our kids. This is from the work of John Gottman and the Gottman Institute. The idea is that there are bids for connection, right? And a bid is any effort that is made to get someone's attention, to get some affirmation, to get some connection. That's a bid. And it's super broad. It can be someone comes and sits next to you a little bit closer than they usually do on the couch. Someone taps you on the shoulder. Someone makes you a meal, asks you what you want for dinner, invites you to play catch, waves, like almost anything can be a bid for connection. And that bid matters. So we want to turn towards that bid, right? Turning towards is about paying attention to the bid and affirming that the bid was made. You might not be able to comply with the bid. Your kid might say, hey, Dad, can we go play catch? And you might have to say, I can't play catch right now because I have to finish up these emails and then I have to do the dishes. But after that, I can play catch. Or tomorrow I can play catch or whatever. That's valid, right? But just ignoring them is turning away. So we want to respond to these bids. Don't ignore them when your kid asks for something. Some of us do. And also, some of us have ADHD and we miss those bids. So know what that might be so that you can acknowledge it more effectively. Turning against, hopefully no one in this audience is doing that. I would assume you're not because you wouldn't be here if this was you. But turning against would be if your kid says, hey, can we play catch? And you were like, why would I want to play catch with you? You're terrible at Frisbee or something. That's not a plan. That's not good. That's going to damage relationships. When it comes to these bids, we want to respond to them like 83% of the time, like a vast majority of the time we want to be responding to them. If we're responding to them less than 30, 40%, we're going to be, that relationship is going to be pretty damaged. So we want to make sure we're getting a high rate of response. Again, not in affirmation, not in confirmation, not saying, yes, let's play catch, just saying, I acknowledge that you want to play catch. I would love to, but I can't at the moment because blah, 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 and letting them know. So those bids are the first level of connecting with our kids. A more concrete example, more specific ideas for ways to connect with our kids, do an activity together. That's what dads are all about. Like, that's our gimmick, right? Men tend to connect and bond over activities. So do that, right? Play board games with them, build something, play some video games. You can also connect by teaching them a skill. Show them how to fix the faucet when you're fixing the faucet. Teach them how to grill or cook a favorite meal. Get active with them, right? If you're a gym guy, bring your kid to the gym, teach them how to do the Arnold press, right? Go running together, play a sport, whatever it may be. Develop some rituals for connection. Maybe you do that roses and thorns thing at dinner where you share good stuff and bad stuff. Maybe after watching a movie, you debrief and talk about what you thought of the movie. That's a great way to connect. And reading to them is awesome. That's the number one way to ritual for connection. Is just read to your kids at night before bed. That creates a ton of connection. And then be willing to learn from them, because that's also going to foster connection. Ask them how to play Minecraft. Find out who their favorite YouTubers are, right? Dig into the stuff that they like, especially as they get older. And that gap can get a little bit wider, some of which is because they want and need independence. But, every now and then sneak in a little, hey, what are you doing? What are you up to? And most importantly, have a plan for ways to connect with your kids. Think about what that is and have a plan for how you're going to be connecting with your kid. Another little interlude. I want to talk about a reason versus an excuse. I hear from dads a lot. Oh, they're just using ADHD as an excuse. I don't know why it's always the dads, but it's always the dads. Which doesn't mean every dad. It just means if this happens, it's the dad that's talking about it. ADHD is not an excuse, but it is a reason. And this is how I split that hair. And you might need to help your kids split this hair, or you might just need to see that they're already splitting it this way. An excuse means I don't have to feel bad about any of this. I don't have to feel bad about why the mistake happened. I don't have to feel bad about the fact that the mistake happened. I don't have to do anything to fix the mistake or clean up my mess. That's an excuse. A reason is I understand why I made this mistake. I know it's my ADHD. And that means I don't have to carry as much of the emotional guilt and shame as I might otherwise, because I have an understanding of why it happened. And I'm able to put down some of the guilt and shame for the problem that I caused. But I am still responsible for cleaning up the mess. I still have to solve the problem. So a reason is a way to take this mistake and put some of it down so that it doesn't define who I am. It's just a mistake that I made. Whereas an excuse is, I feel so bad about this that I can't even look at it. I'm just going to excuse it away and pretend it's not my fault because I can't handle the fact that I made the mistake. A reason is I'm handling the fact that I made a mistake, but I'm doing it in a healthy way. Because the other option is guilt and shame. The other option is I made this mistake and I always make this mistake. I'm a terrible person and I suck at life and I don't even know why anyone lets me in their house, right? Like, we don't want that. So play with that as a thought process with your kids. We want to let them put down some of the guilt and shame, but also be responsible for what happened. I know there's a ton of content here. I'm sorry if I'm going too fast, but there's plenty of time for questions later. Helping kids get stuff done. I want you to remember that kids do well when they can. So and kids want to please the adults in their lives. So if kids aren't meeting our standards, if they're behaving in a way that we don't like or act like they don't care, something's missing in their skill set probably, or something is being missed by the adult. Like we're missing something. And we want to be wondering what that is. Is it conflict at school? Is it a skill set that's missing? Is it a resource that they need? What's going on? To help kids get stuff done. When they struggle, manage your feelings about those struggles. For ADHD dads, your kids might make mistakes that remind you of your own mistakes and struggles when you were a kid. And that might make you feel frustrated or angry. You're mad at yourself. You're not mad at your kid. Put that down, right? You're upset with you. You're not upset with them. Know that that's what's going on. Process through that and then address your kid's mistake with them as often as you possibly can. For non-ADHD dads, your kids' mistakes might be hard for you to understand and relate to. You might not get it. You might be like, why are you not doing your homework? When I was in school, I just did it. It wasn't a big deal. It's like 5 minutes of work. One, they might have more homework than you did when you were a kid. That goes for all the parents here. And two, they have a learning disability. ADHD is a learning disability. We just don't think of it that way. But the executive function components make it a learning disability. It's hard for them to get stuff done and do things that neurotypical people can often do very easily. Just know that. Learn about what's going on there so that you can manage your frustration with them not doing enough. Also, when it comes to helping them, recognize their ability and meet them where they are. ADHD is a developmental disorder. Kids with ADHD lag behind their peers in brain development roughly 30% in terms of emotional and executive functioning development. Practically, like kind of observationally, it works out to like a year to 3 years, 1, 2, or 3 years, something like that. If we take the middle of that, if we take 2 years, all of a sudden, a kid who's in 5th grade is performing like a 3rd grader in some areas, not all of them, but some of them. A kid who's in 7th grade, like core middle school time, is suddenly in 5th grade, end of elementary school. Your junior in high school just became a freshman. That's a big deal. So be mindful of the fact that it's a developmental disorder and understand that that is affecting their ability to perform and meet them where they are. If they have trouble cleaning their whole room at once, maybe they can do just their closet, or they can get the clothes off the ground and put away and help them do it in pieces because that's where they are. Other ways to help kids get stuff done. Set clear expectations. Be clear on your family values so that that can help to guide decision-making and guide expected performance. Have general guidelines that are that specific examples can fit into. One of my general guidelines for the summer that's coming, my kids finish school on Friday, is my kids are expected to create as much as they consume during the course of the summer, roughly. And consuming is like screen time, right? Creating is you cooked a meal, you built a fire pit, which might be a mission I give to my kids. You cleaned your room, you went for a walk and, worked on your exercise and health and created a little stronger, healthier body, right? That kind of stuff. That's all creating. Even reading to me counts as creating because as you read, you imagine stuff. And there's some stuff that's kind of on the line, right? Like, are you watching this video to learn how to make a Lego set? Like, that's consuming in order to create. And that is sort of a wash. We also want to define done. Our kid needs to know when they're finished. Do they have to read all 500 pages of the book, or can they read the first 10? Do they have to read a certain number of pages, or do they only have to read for 20 minutes? How do we know when they're done? How do they know when they're done? Clean your room is vague. How do I know when I'm done cleaning my room? Be clear when and why expectations are being made. If we're making an expectation, let them know. If you're like, screen time is over at 9 o'clock, but if we're watching a movie as a family and it goes till 10, it's not the end of the world. Let's make sure we know that. Accommodate their needs as well, right? Scaffolding is just slowly building up to where they need to be. So meet them where they are and then raise the expectation a little bit so that once they start meeting that new expectation consistently, raise the expectation a little bit, etc. Again, break tasks down into small chunks. They don't have to clean up all of the Legos. They just have to clean up the red Legos. And you're going to clean up the blue Legos. And their little sister is going to clean up the yellow Legos. Break tasks down into small, manageable chunks. And of course, use tools, right? Set reminders in Alexa, put sticky notes on things to remind them to do stuff, set alarms on your phone or their phone or an alarm clock if you have one of those. We want to do those sorts of things. And then finally, help them break down what they need to do, right? Do they have household chores? What are they? Let's make a list. If they have schoolwork, because they're in summer school or they go to school year round, or you're just waiting till next year to do this. Make sure they know, like, let's have a list of what do you have for homework? What are the big projects? Help them stay on top of things. And then also free time, set expectations for free time, right? Is it creating versus consuming? Is that what's going on? Is it they can only use the iPad for an hour? They can only watch TV for half an hour or 2 hours or whatever. What does that look like? What are your boundaries? Are they expected to do homework first and then household chores and then they can have free time? Or do they get to come home from school and have free time and then do schoolwork and chores are saved for the weekend? What's going on there? Set those boundaries, make things clear. That's part of defining done, is the expectation is clear. I've defined done. One last little interlude and then we'll wrap up. Respect has two meanings. This is another area that dads we sometimes get tripped up in. Those two meanings are not the same. One meaning of respect is I am going to treat you with dignity and I expect you to treat me with dignity, right? Like that's a meaning of respect. Let's respect each other. Respect me and I'll respect you, that kind of stuff. There's also respect in terms of treat me as though I'm better than you, right? Respect my authority, that stuff. That's not the same, right? Because if I'm expecting you to treat me like I'm better than you, I don't have to treat you with dignity because I'm better than you. That can happen. And that undermines the relationship with our kid. So pay attention to what's going on with this respect and how is it playing out? Are you respecting your kid and they're respecting you? Or is your kid respecting you and you're not really treating them with the dignity that they deserve, right? That doesn't mean we have to interact as though we're the same, right? Because you're the parent and they're not your friend, they're your kid, right? So hopefully you have a cordial relationship and you get along and you play and you goof off and you have fun, but brass tacks means you're in charge, right? And you steer the ship. And they need to respect the fact that you steer the ship. But in the course of that, we need to respect their needs while we're steering the ship. We need to respect what they want. And we need to, as they get older, give them input into what the ship is doing. Where are we going with this ship? So respect has two meanings, and it's really a two-way street. We really want it to be a two-way street. In conclusion, the better we manage our own stress and anxiety, the calmer the tone we will set at home. And the calmer the tone, the better, because that's going to help everyone's day go more smoothly. Developing a strong connection with our kids requires effort and intention on our part. And it's our job, not their job. We are the ones with the power. So the buck stops with us. If that relationship with your kid is damaged, if they're not like treating you as though they enjoy your company, that's on you to fix. They can't fix it. They don't have the power. And kids want to please us. And they will do well when they can. It's our job to set them up for success. It's our job to start to understand and learn why they're not being successful and then change the situation so that they can be. With that, once again, my name is Brendan Mahan. I'm the host of the ADHD Essentials podcast. I host online parent coaching groups. I've got a new batch coming up in July. Feel free to email me at brendan@adhdessentials.com if you would like to hear more about that. And with that, I think we are in for questions.
Yes, Brendan, thank you so much. You gave us a lot to think about. I'm going to dive right into this great set of questions we received after briefly thanking our sponsor, Brain Balance, one more time. So we did hear from a few dads who have attempted your strategy of really communicating their escalation of anxiety. And one who said, nothing changes. Their kids don't seem to care. Another one who said that they claim that I'm causing them anxiety and then they have to leave. They don't know what else to do. They just have to leave the premises. And another who said their kid is just oppositional. Advice for these dads who are trying to communicate openly and honestly, as you suggested, and just running into brick walls.
Yeah, and who are communicating openly and honestly right now, right? Like that's a pretty awesome questions. That's showing some openness, a lot of openness. It's really 3 different ideas. So let me play with them as they come back into my memory. Oppositionality, like if you've got a kid with oppositional defiance, get help. Like get a clinician, get someone to work with. That's really challenging a disorder diagnosis. It's also an anxiety disorder, right? Like what happens is the kid's anxiety spikes and they get oppositional because it's easier to say no to something than to say yes to something. If I say yes, I don't know what's going to happen. If I say no, I do. Nothing's going to happen. I'm not doing it. And even arguing with dad, it feels more familiar if I've been doing that for a while than not arguing with dad, right? So because it feels more familiar, it feels more safe, even though it actually increases everyone's anxiety. So oppositionality is tricky. The more we can reduce the overall anxiety in the home, the gentler some of that oppositionality is going to get because there's going to be less anxiety. But it's super hard. And I would want to honor how hard that is. It's not a thing I can crack in a quick Q&A because it takes a lot of work and it takes months, if not years, to navigate that. So I just want to honor that that's really challenging. And I hope that you're able to get the support that you need. But the more we can keep things calm, the better it's going to go. And some of that is delivery, right? Because I'm going to loop the oppositionality and my kid just says I'm making them more anxious. Believe them. You are making your kid more anxious. They're not claiming it, which I think was the word that was used. You are. They said so. They communicated clearly. You need to change how you do that. You need to ask them, what am I doing that's causing you to feel anxious? Sometimes it's stuff that we don't even think about, right? As a person in the world, you might be tall and your kid is small. And just you looming over them might increase their anxiety. Take a knee, get down to their level, and then make the request. See what that does. Sit down on the couch next to them and make the request. Maybe you have to sit down on the couch and then slouch over a little bit so you're even smaller. I don't know. But get closer to their size so that it's not a completely unintentional implied physical threat. But that happens. Like big, tall dudes are scary. They just are. Especially to little kids. So address that, right? Figure out how to be less big, which means taking a knee, sitting down, something like that. Get below their eye line if you can. Pay attention to your tone. Pay attention to your body language, right? Are your arms crossed? Are you squaring off on them when you could otherwise pivot out? Like what's going on there? What's your tone of voice? Are you acting very stern? Or are you asking more gently? What does that look like? In the course of showing your escalation, what's up there? Are you saying like, hey, can you put your dishes in the sink? Hey, can you put your dishes in the sink? Hey, can you put your dishes in the sink? Like those are 3 escalations. But some of you had a visceral response, especially to that last one. I'm sure of it. We can do the same thing by going, hey, can you put your dishes in the sink? Hey, can you put your dishes in the sink? Because I've already asked twice. See how my voice is getting gentler in that second one, right? And then the third one, kind of in the same area. I've already asked you twice. I don't want to ask you again. I need you to put your dishes in the sink. That's polite. It's calm. I'm speaking more clearly. I'm paying attention to my diction. It imparts the significance of what I'm asking, but hopefully doesn't bring as much emotional content. Doesn't tap into that amygdala part of the brain. So that's all there. And in terms of like, I am communicating my escalation, but it doesn't get my kid to do the thing. Maybe we need some consequences. Maybe there needs to be like hey, I've noticed that we always have this problem, right? Where you keep leaving your dishes in the sink or whatever it is. That needs to end. So when it's not happening, when we're away from the problem, sit down with your kid and whoever else needs to be there, have a little family meeting and discuss this problem and how are we going to solve it? How are we going to crack it? And if it doesn't get solved, then what? Right? Like, does that mean we're taking away an iPad? Does that mean that you're grounded for a week? What does it mean? And in the course of figuring out the then what, don't go with the punishment fits the crime. I don't like that. Go with the consequence fits the solution to the problem. If they're not doing their homework because they're playing the iPad, cool, take away the iPad. But if they're not doing their homework because they're sitting at the table and not doing anything because they're overwhelmed, they don't know how to address the homework in general, taking away the iPad doesn't help with that problem. It's a different problem. So play with those ideas. I hope that was at least marginally useful.
Yes, thank you. Here's another great question from a father with ADHD who heard your message about validating feelings, but also said, sometimes their child can be mean, right? Like seeking attention by yelling at their parent, telling them they hate them. We've all experienced these things. Can you say to your kid, hey, you know what? You've hurt my feelings.
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, I'm going to be a jerk and say I have never had my kid tell me that they hated me. And they're 13, so it might be coming up soon, but I doubt it. And some of that is because I've been doing this stuff that I'm preaching with my kids their whole lives, right? So our relationships have started in a different place. And some of that is like when my kids do something that is offensive, right? Because they do hurt my feelings. They just haven't told me that they hate me. I call them out on it. I'm not mean about it, but I'm like, hey, I don't talk to you like that. Why are you talking to me like that? And right. I like 5. They maybe when they were 5, they told me they hated me when they were learning the word. But like I immediately, that would have been my response, right? Like, I don't talk to you like that. So what's going on? How can you talk to me like that? No. Oh, that's a really strong question. That lands hard, right? And we're allowed to do that. We have feelings too. We are people, right? We don't want to do it all the time. We don't want to overdo it. We don't need to lead with guilt. But in an extreme example, absolutely that's okay. And if your kid is just angry all the time, what's going on, right? There's something under that anger. Maybe they're feeling like disconnected. Maybe they're feeling lost. Maybe they're feeling overwhelmed by the fact that they have ADHD and can't perform at the level of expectation that they think the whole world has for them. You got to make it safe for them to have those struggles. And connected to this, something that I almost put in the workshop but didn't, but I'm going to mention it here because I think it's critically important that we know about it. There's this concept called moral injury. The idea is that it comes from the military, but doesn't have to stay there. The idea is that like you've been living and owning this particular moral perspective for however long, and then suddenly that moral view gets broken. Or you have to go against that moral view, or a person who has power over you and you're expecting to behave in a moral way suddenly doesn't, right? Person in authority. COVID did that to all of our children. At the most core, we are, as parents, expected to keep our kids safe. And suddenly nothing is safe because COVID, right? And so we're asking them, especially early on when it was really intense, and some kids still feel like it's that intense. COVID is here, but you still have to go to school, right? That's the most basic one, right? Like, even though it's dangerous to go to school, you still have to go. Potentially, that's leading to some moral injury and leading to kids like being angry with authority. And certainly we've seen that in the schools this year across the country. We've seen kids punch teachers and principals. We've seen kids there was like a TikTok thing where they were playing pranks on schools and ripping up bathrooms and stuff. Like, there's been a lot of anger aimed at schools, and it's this moral injury stuff. And it's also coming out on parents. It's just not as obvious because that stuff stays at home. So when your kid's doing that, when they're not angry, do a check-in with them and see what's up. Like, hey, sometimes you get really mad. You know what's going on? Help me understand. And don't be afraid to get a clinician. I know they're hard to get right now, but there's nothing wrong with seeking out a therapist and getting some guidance on that stuff. Or a coach. Coaches too. Therapists are a better option. Some coaches can do it. Some coaches can't.
Okay. So we're down to our last minute. I'm going to tempt fate a little bit and throw in one last question here because I think
I can stick around, but I don't know if it'll end
important. We can go over a few minutes. This is from the Fathers Without ADHD. So it's two related questions, I think. One is advice on getting your child to stick with an activity or a sport to which they have committed,
Yep.
are struggling with. And the other is the compulsion to micromanage a child who it looks like they're displaying laziness. And you're afraid that by stepping back, your child will fail.
These are two very different things. Okay. One, your kid engages in an activity and then they quit. The next activity that they engage in, they have to do it for a week, a month. I don't know. You pick it. It's going to depend on the situation. Longer than the last one, right? So they play the guitar for 3 months and then quit. And now they want to take gymnastics lessons. Okay, cool. But you got to take gymnastics lessons for 2 months, something like that, right? Also, you might want to set a timeline. Like activities can be experiments depending on the age of the kid or even not, right? Play soccer for 1 season. Let's see how it goes. And then we'll make a decision after that season is done. But you're making the commitment for a whole season. You're playing for the whole season. When my kids started in Kempo, I was like, okay, but you're locked in to get your orange belt. You've got to get that first belt. You're not allowed to quit before the first belt. Now they're blue belts, right? So they kept going. But before you start the activity, pick we will check back in to see how this is going at orange belt at the end of the season after 3 months, like whatever that is. Pick that time with them. Some of them are going to be easy, like sports that have seasons. Some of them are going to be harder, like playing the piano. But do it that way. And don't be afraid to make it a skill, right? Like you can quit the piano after you learn 1 song instead of after 3 months. That way they get some sense of accomplishment. So there's that. And then the other one was micromanaging and not wanting to let your kid fail, not wanting to see your kid fail.
Right.
There was something else in there. I'm not remembering what it was.
It's should they let their child fail, especially when it looks like that being the key. Laziness.
Lazy. Yeah. There's no such thing as lazy. Lazy is not a thing. The only person who is being lazy when we accuse a kid of being lazy is the person using the word lazy, because there's something deeper going on. If your kid is struggling, there's a skill set that's missing. That skill set might be planning. That skill set might be execution. That skill set might be emotional regulation. That skill set might be like math and knowing their multiplication table. I don't know. It could be anything. But if your kid is struggling, figure out why. Ask them. Ask their coach or any adults in the area. Find out if this is just not a thing that is good for them. Like maybe it doesn't make sense for them to be playing the sport because they're 4 feet tall and they're trying to play basketball or whatever. But like have those conversations with the coach or with the leader or whatever, the teacher, your kid, find out what's going on there, and don't micromanage. Like that, it's going to make it harder for them to feel accomplished and feel successful if we're on top of them the whole time. Because then we succeeded. They didn't. Does that make sense? Like, yeah. Like Dad, you did that. I didn't do that. Like you did that. So give them the opportunity to succeed or fail on their own. It's about raising a healthy, well-adjusted 26-year-old. Like you got time. Even if your kid is 16, like they got a lot of time. I was a chump when I was 16. I was not doing okay. And now I'm like a well-respected member of the ADHD community. So I figured something out. And what I figured out was my ADHD, but also people and kids and how to teach and all that stuff. Like your kid will get there. Be patient. It's not about 2nd grade, 5th grade, junior year. It's about raising a healthy, well-adjusted 26-year-old. And they have to do most of that work. We can't do it for them.
I think that is the perfect sentiment to end on. I wish we had more time, but Brendan, thank you so much for this session. It was really unlike anything we've had at Attitude, and I think added so much value to this community. So really thank you for leading this discussion, and thank you to all of the parents out there who listened and contributed your questions and comments. We hope you will join us again and also sign up to get all of the announcements about our newsletter, our upcoming webinars, articles, and research updates at attitudemag.com/newsletters. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search for podcast 405 to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the certificate of attendance option. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see everyone again soon.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.